if an investor asks for your documents within 24 hours, would you be able to send them on time, confidently? Hi, my name is Dee, and welcome to Law, Life, and Business with Dee. On this channel, we talk about practical legal matters that apply to new business owners and entrepreneurs that want to upscale their businesses. And on today's episode, we'll be talking about early stage funding, not pitching, not the hype, but more about what you need to have in place in order to attract investors. Because let's face the truth, right? Great ideas do not get funded. Fundable businesses do. Many businesses start looking for funding long before their business is structurally and legally ready to receive funds. And what ends up happening is that they lose control, they lose ownership, and they lose opportunities that they don't even realize they're losing. A lot of business owners think that funding is about convincing investors that your idea is exciting. But actually, from an investor's perspective, funding is all about risks. At this stage, investors are not expecting perfection. It's a new company, it can't be perfect. But what they would like to know is clarity. Your business should look investable before it is profitable. So, before an investor looks at your numbers, your pitch, your projections, they would like to know the foundations. Investors carry out due diligence exercise on the companies that they intend to invest in because they need to understand the basics of that company. They need to know whether the company is legally incorporated and structurally ready to receive their funds. They need to know who the shareholders are, who the directors are. They would need to know whether there are any disputes that will come along or any litigation that has been instituted against the company and what the liabilities or the exposures are on those litigation and disputes. They would need to know whether you have the regulatory backing to do the business that you do. They would need to know whether there are any IP, that is intellectual properties, that are held by the company and not in the individuals that work in that company. I mentioned intellectual property because that is a big one. Where the company has intellectual property, investors would like to know that the IP sits with the business and not with individuals because the IP forms a substantial asset of that business. Investors also review your contracts. They would need to know what contracts have you executed as a company. Do you have non-disclosure agreements that you have signed with those that do business with you in order to protect your business and its confidential information? What service agreements have you entered into? Are you the provider of the service, or do you have partners that provide you service that is built into your operations? And what contracts and what roles and liabilities and responsibilities are set out in that contract? Do you have third party suppliers? What specific provisions do you have contained in those agreements? We would have another episode where we discuss specifics of each of these agreements and the important provisions that need to be contained in them in order to protect you as a business. So now you would ask, what does early stage funding look like? So there are different types of funding that you can secure. The one I actually like the most is your family and friends funding, right? Where you're just about to start your business, you have your family members, your friends, you pitch your idea to them and tell them, come and be my first investors, right? Monies in these investments usually range between $5,000 to maybe 150,000 per investor, something light, right? And then businesses also look at angel investors, individuals that are willing to invest in your company, like high net worth individuals. And then you have the seed and the pre-seed rounds that sometimes have your venture capitalist funds play a role in those investments. Of course, they bring in as high as from $1 million to $10 million. In some of these early stage rounds, business owners think that they're a bit informal, right? I'm just talking to my family and friends, no big deal. Or I'm talking to a high net worth individual that I know from somewhere that I worked at some point in time, an angel investor. So these are all informal, no need to enter into substantial agreements. Well, that is a very wrong and dangerous position because at these early stages, there's so many things you need to think about. You need to think about the value of your business against what you are willing to give these early investors. At this stage, you will need to make sure that you set out what exactly they are investing in. You need to know what the value of their investment would mean to the business. You will need to provide clarity on what they're investing in. That is, are they buying shares in the company Or is it more of a convertible loan note where it's not exactly shares at this point, but at a future date, it can be converted following some specific events that are set out in the document? I know this sounds a bit overwhelming, but in subsequent series, I'll break down these various terms. Okay? Yeah, as I was saying, you would need to set out what rights are attached to the investment. You will need to explain what happens when the company grows. You need to set out who makes decisions or how decisions are being made in the business. Like I mentioned previously, one of the things you would not want to do is to give out control or a large volume of your business at such an early stage. So now, this is where the legal documentation comes in. You will need to have a term sheet in place. So the term sheet simply sets out the preliminary terms that have been agreed between the parties. What amount is going to be given to you? For what value of the company would that amount be received? What exactly is the investor asking for in terms of control? Do they want a seat on your board? Or do they want to have voting rights in these decisions that are being made by the company? You will need to also enter into the substantive legal agreements, which are an investment agreement, for instance, or a share subscription agreement if the investors are subscribing to shares in your company. And you would also need to enter into a shareholders agreement because depending on the structure you take, they may now form shareholders in your business from the jump. And of course, you would need to update your cap table to reflect the current position of the company, setting out the shareholders of the company, the investments that they put in, the value of those investments, as in the percentage shareholding they now have in your company. Verbal promises don't survive funding rounds. So, whatever is promised must be documented. If something isn't properly documented, it wouldn't protect you or the investors. If there's one thing that I want you to take out of this episode, it is that funding is a process, not an event. Businesses that raise funding well are not necessarily the loudest or the most talked about, but they are actually the most prepared businesses. When your structure is clean, you attract better investors, you negotiate from a position of strength, and you avoid making costly mistakes. In the next episode, I'll be breaking down some of the terms that you heard in this episode. I will be detailing the provisions that need to be contained in the critical contracts or agreements that I mentioned. I would also be highlighting some of the items that need to be contained in a pitch deck. Don't worry, you would get that funding that you require for your business. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I know it could have been a lot. Please watch out for the next episode so that you can be better enlightened. In the meantime, please like this episode, subscribe to my channel, and continue to put those comments in, and I see you all next time. Bye.